I found her dying in a ravine with a wound that should have killed her, and I spent 5 days in the wilderness keeping her alive through fever and infection and pure stubbornness. I did not know she was a queen. I just knew she was a patient who needed me." Marcus Reid stood over the prone figure of an alien woman. Her pale blue skin shimmered under the moonlight like frosted glass, while silver braids draped across cracked earth. The wound in her side, deep and ragged, had already turned black at the edges. "Come on," Marcus muttered to himself, his hands moving swiftly over medical supplies strewn around him. "We need to stabilize before we can even think about treating that." The woman's chest rose shallowly, barely keeping up with each breath she took. The wound gaped open as if mocking any attempt at closure. "She needs surgery," Marcus decided aloud, more to himself than the unconscious patient. But he didn't have a full surgical suite in this wilderness. All he had was an emergency kit and his skills. He would do what he could. His hands moved like clockwork, applying pressure where necessary and gently cleaning around the wound with sterilized cloth soaked in alcohol from his limited supply. "Stay with me," Marcus said softly to her as she slipped into unconsciousness again after another pulse of pain hit her system. "I did not drag you out of that ravine just to lose you now." When he could, and dared, look up at the patient's face, she was muttering something under her breath in a tongue foreign even to Marcus-trained ears. Fever set in on day 2 as expected with limited supplies against infection. He had no choice but to improvise. Throughout night after sleepless night, Marcus kept vigil over his mysterious patient, changing cold compresses and watching temperatures rise and fall unpredictably until dawn broke once more into a sky filled only by clouds of uncertainty. Her grip tightened around the hand he offered for comfort as fever-induced spasms racked her body. "Do not leave," she whispered hoarsely through chattering teeth despite his assurance that he wouldn't abandon her no matter what happened next. On day 3, the crisis seemed to ease when fevers began breaking down into a more manageable state where lucidity returned enough for coherent thought and conversation, albeit cautious ones. Her amber eyes fixed on him with gratitude barely masked by lingering confusion. "You saved me." Marcus paused in bandaging another round of infection treatment while brushing back stray hairs from her forehead. "Not done yet," he replied grimly. "That wound needs at least 2 more days before you can move without risk." She blinked slowly, studying him with an intensity that made his stomach clench uncomfortably beneath the cool air and dust-coated surroundings. "Do you know who I am?" she asked quietly. He shook his head firmly, even as he finished tying off a clean bandage securely enough to hold through another day's recovery progress. "Someone who needs medical attention," was all Marcus allowed himself to admit out loud, leaving no room for further inquiry into her identity beyond immediate care necessities. Her lips curved upwards faintly despite the pain evident on every breath she drew. Then a laugh escaped almost silently from those pale blue lips, yet there seemed little humor behind it compared against stark reality surrounding them both. "I am glad," was all he heard before silence settled again between them. By day 4, her strength had visibly returned enough for sitting upright and eating meals prepared by Marcus with care. Though she watched him closely throughout every activity performed, as if assessing some unknown truth inherent within such acts of assistance offered freely. Once while cleaning up after another meal one afternoon, Marcus noticed the intensity of those eyes upon his movements far too intently. He observed. "What?" he asked bluntly when her gaze failed to break away despite clear indication. Wanting acknowledgement returned back equally strongly. She shifted uncomfortably under questioning scrutiny before finally looking down and admitting quietly, "Nothing. I am just not used to this." "Used to what exactly?" Marcus probed further, genuinely curious now despite initial dismissal earlier of such inquiries regarding her personal history or status beyond immediate health concerns needing addressed first. Silence stretched out between them again briefly as thoughts circled round before she answered softly, "Not used to someone helping without wanting something in return." He snorted almost humorlessly himself, then, because really, the concept seemed so alien yet familiar at once. "I am a doctor," Marcus pointed out succinctly instead by way of explanation, for actions performed purely due medical necessity rather than any personal gain anticipated. A strange smile tugged back one corner of her mouth, this time in recognition. Perhaps understanding beyond what words could easily convey either direction between them. "Yes," was all she managed simply, as if agreeing something deeper now shared between two souls bound thus far through mutual survival struggles. Day 5 dawned clear and unassuming. Yet Marcus knew his routine was about to change irrevocably. He woke early, as usual, brewing a fresh pot of coffee before he began tending to Cythera's wound once more. Her skin had started to mend around the edges, but she still required meticulous care to ensure no infection set in. As Marcus worked on her injury, his mind wandered back through those 5 days of constant vigilance and silent determination. Despite the exhaustion that weighed heavily upon him now, there was a strange sense of peace knowing he had done everything within his power for this enigmatic woman who never gave away any sign of identity beyond fierce loyalty to staying alive. By mid-morning, Marcus noticed something different about her surroundings, an unusual stillness in an otherwise chaotic wilderness. He glanced outside tentatively through the window and froze. Ships were descending with a smooth grace that marked their owners as formidable beings, indeed Vel'Kari vessels, dropping from above like silent shadows into the open field around them. Marcus' heart skipped several beats, but he forced himself to focus on his patient before anything else. He gently prodded Cythera awake, knowing she was due for her next dose of medication and a change in bandages. "Morning," he said softly, as usual despite everything going on outside their makeshift shelter. "Good morning, Marcus." Her voice held an uncharacteristic tremor that did not escape his notice, even amidst this moment's chaos. He nodded towards the window quietly. "Looks like help arrived finally." Her eyes darted to him with a mix of relief and apprehension. "What happens now?" Marcus shrugged simply, while carefully removing old bandages and assessing her condition anew, making sure nothing had changed overnight that required immediate attention before any other concerns could be addressed fully yet today. "Whatever they need," he replied honestly. And then the ships touched down with a soft hum of engines settling into place around them. Warriors poured out in sleek armor and precise movements typical to trained fighters, rather than panicked rescuers searching desperately for their queen. Marcus instinctively moved closer beside Cythera, protectively, ready if anything went wrong, despite how badly she needed proper medical care now more than ever. One warrior stopped dead a few steps away from entering the shelter itself, as his gaze locked onto her form, laid out upon makeshift bedding surrounded by various supplies and equipment used during days of tending wounds. Another man dropped suddenly to one knee, then, facing inward towards them. "My queen." "You live?" Marcus blinked in confusion before turning back, slightly puzzled to look at Cythera herselfly, for her expression to soften ever so subtly, even as she looked almost guilty under his scrutiny, and realization dawned slowly across Marcus' face. She spoke quietly, but with authority clear within every word chosen carefully. "I was going to tell you." Marcus stared. "Why?" "Died," shaking his head in disbelief more than anything else. "Queen," he repeated dumbly. Cythera sat up stiffly despite pain evident through her movements. It didn't matter, though, because something had shifted visibly. No, her posture straightened into command presence, even wounded, as she addressed all those gathered around them respectfully yet firmly. "I live because of this human." The lead warrior glared sharply over at Marcus, who only blinked again dumbfoundedly. "A human touched the queen." Cythera's voice cut through like ice cracking across still waters, cold and deadly accurate in its rebuke against ingrained prejudice, standing firm despite everything else changing drastically around them. "While you were searching the wrong sector." Then she looked directly at General Kreth, who had dared question Marcus earlier about his role here. "General," while you assured everyone I was dead." Kreth paled visibly before stepping back slightly in deference to Cythera's command presence, once more unyielding despite recent events that might have derailed lesser beings entirely. Marcus watched this all unfold with growing incredulity written across every line of his body language, though he didn't let go of her hand, still firmly held, as if grounding himself amidst newfound reality breaking around him like dawn light through cracks in darkness covering everything previously known until now. Cythera took a breath before turning fully back towards Marcus, looking deeply into those gray, green eyes filled suddenly with myriad emotions swirling together uncomfortably yet powerfully evident. She stood slowly, and even wounded, there was something unmistakable about how she moved, then dignity reclaimed firmly through sheer willpower itself rather than physical prowess alone. "Marcus," Cythera began softly, but definitively, "this human bathed my wounds, held my hand through fever, asked for nothing in return." She paused briefly to emphasize each point made clearly before continuing. "Nothing." Then she leaned forward ever so slightly, lifting his hand up and bringing it gently down beside her lips, where they pressed a kiss softly onto Marcus' knuckles in public display of something both new. Yet the throne room of Vel'Kari Castle was a grandiose expanse, its walls lined with polished dark stone that reflected an army's worth of battle scars and ancient engravings depicting scenes from centuries past. The air inside buzzed with energy as hundreds of Vel'Kari nobles murmured amongst themselves under the watchful gaze of their newly returned queen. General Kreth stood at one end, a smug smile curling his lip. He had been acting ruler for a week now, assuming that Cythera was dead. The castle's operations hummed along smoothly while he made decisions and issued orders without her oversight. His pride grew daily as the rumors of her death seemed confirmed by each passing day. Then she walked in. Cythera moved with an unsteady grace, leaning slightly on a human male who followed closely beside her, his weathered face mirroring none of Kreth's arrogance, but rather a mix of tired acceptance and bewildered confusion. The general's smile froze as he registered the sight before him. Alive, healing, not merely standing upright, but supported by this unknown presence at her side. "Your Majesty," Cythera announced clearly from atop the throne steps, her voice carrying across the vast chamber despite its crowded state. "I have returned." General Kreth stepped forward quickly to meet his queen's eye contact, hoping to salvage some semblance of decorum and control over proceedings now that she had arrived back unexpectedly. "Your Majesty," he said hurriedly, bowing slightly, even as he spoke, "we searched everywhere for you." "This is wonderful news indeed." Cythera raised a hand without warning, silencing the room in an instant with her mere gesture, alone a testament to both her authority and the respect commanded by her status. "You did not search where I was," she countered coolly, her voice low, but cutting through the air like sharp steel against metal. "Almost as if you knew I would never be found." Kreth's expression twisted into one of guilty apprehension. He stepped back hurriedly before Cythera could demand an answer outright. "Leave us," Queen Cythera commanded quietly, turning to the human beside her again, who nodded at once in understanding of unspoken orders. The guards stationed around the perimeter began moving swiftly through the crowd, ushering those present out without delay or hesitation. Once clear, only Kreth remained looking nervously from Cythera back to Marcus, and then down to his feet again almost immediately under her piercing stare. Cythera leaned closer to her companion momentarily while still addressing Kreth directly. "Marcus," she said softly, but pointedly, giving him a silent nod towards the exit door that stood open slightly behind them, now empty of other witnesses besides just these three figures left here within this throne room setting. "Please go wait outside." The human male nodded once more before stepping past both Cythera and Kreth, without another word spoken aloud between any party involved. His actions spoke volumes, however, regarding compliance with royal requests, even amidst confusion over unfolding events. With Marcus gone now, The tension in air thickened palpably around Kreth, who finally mustered some courage enough to speak up again despite clear signs indicating severe consequences likely forthcoming. "Your Majesty," he began hesitantly, while still trying hard not to meet eyes directly held upon him fiercely by Cythera herself, instead focusing on ground beneath his boots. Cythera cut off any further attempts at excuses before they could fully form through lips moving or thoughts conceived. However, cutting straight to core issue here today presented itself most acutely now that she had returned from her own death sentence, pronounced prematurely, amongst those gathered waiting anxiously for news of Queen's fate. "We will discuss your failures later," Cythera decreed decisively instead. She gestured grandly, then towards Marcus, who remained standing just outside open doorway watching closely, but respecting distance maintained here within chamber proper itself currently. "First, more important matters must be attended to first." Turning back toward throne area, herself now with purpose, in every step taken confidently forward, again despite lingering injuries, suffered still healing visibly through pale blue skin now gradually mending underneath fresh bandages, applied by Marcus's hands, diligently, over past days gone by here, within this very space converted temporarily into makeshift medical bay. Cythera ascended to her elevated seat slowly, but deliberately, pausing briefly atop steps, leading upward, before sitting down formally facing court once more fully gathered now ready for news from their sovereign ruler returned unexpectedly. Her voice carried clearly and authoritatively across room, again, even without physical gesture used this time power resonated through each word spoken loudly clear, for all ears present here today. "This human," Cythera addressed nobles assembled below, her eyes scanning over faces visible before speaking further names aloud, specifically now pointing directly toward Marcus still standing outside doorway, but well within earshot range of what transpired immediately thereafter inside throne room proper itself. "Found me dying out there at the palace grounds, were a blur of vibrant greens and blues under the alien sky, as Marcus made his way to yet another consultation in one of the palace's many medical wings. He had adapted to life among Vel'Kari royalty, though he still preferred the humanness of his former existence. But now, every day brought new challenges and patients that needed his hands. On approach, it was a job that never stopped. The new wing, built at Marcus's insistence, after countless complaints about the old facility's shortcomings, was bustling with activity. He walked through its sterile corridors with practiced ease, nodding to attendants and nurses who greeted him as he passed by. His presence here had become both comforting and demanding, for his staff Ivorion respected him, but they also feared the no-nonsense field doctor. That evening, after a particularly grueling day filled with consultations and emergency cases, Marcus found himself wandering through the palace gardens alone. The stars above were unlike anything on earth, a constellation of shimmering lights that stretched endlessly across an ink-black sky. He often stood here in these moments, when everything seemed overwhelming, letting his mind wander to memories long past. As he gazed up at those unfamiliar celestial patterns, a voice broke into his thoughts. "Missing home?" He turned to see Cythera standing beside him, her silver-braided hair catching the glow of torches lining the garden path. Her pale blue skin was now mostly healed from her battle wounds, but there were still faint traces of bruises and scars that spoke volumes about what they had both endured. Marcus hesitated for a moment before answering truthfully. "Sometimes," he admitted softly, "but home isn't just a place anymore." She stepped closer, her gaze softening as she looked at him. "You've made this your new home," Cythera said gently, reaching out to take his hand in hers. He let himself be pulled into an embrace, their closeness grounding him once again amidst the strangeness of Vel'Kari life. "I care about my patients," Marcus explained quietly, pulling her closer so that he could rest his forehead against hers. "And some stubborn patient is right here." Cythera laughed, a warm sound that resonated through him, and made him smile despite the lingering exhaustion in his bones. She cupped his face tenderly with one hand. "I was never stubborn," she said teasingly, her amber eyes full of mischief. Marcus raised an eyebrow at her playful words. "You walked out of bed on day 3, he reminded her firmly, remembering that time vividly when she had tried to stand up despite the risks involved in doing so prematurely. Cythera's expression softened into a fond smile as she recalled those moments, 2 memories they shared intimately now. "I was testing you," she admitted quietly, her fingers tracing along his jawline gently. He snorted lightly at that, remembering how irritated and concerned he had felt back then despite the underlying affection for this fierce queen who allowed herself to be vulnerable in front of him like no one else ever could before or since. "You were being difficult," Marcus retorted playfully, but with genuine care in his tone now. Cythera sobered slightly, her grip on him tightening just a fraction as she looked deep into his eyes. "I was scared," she whispered softly. Vulnerable for the first time. Marcus understood all too well what that meant, not just physically wounded and near death's door, but emotionally open in ways never before possible with anyone else. "You needed hydration," he reminded her gently, recalling how critical it had been to ensure she stayed hydrated amidst infection risks lurking ever closer. Cythera laughed softly against his chest then, pulling him down for a kiss that spoke volumes about shared experiences and mutual respect forged through hardship. "Thank you," she murmured between kisses, tracing patterns along his neck with gentle fingertips. Marcus held her close, feeling the warmth of gratitude radiating from her in waves. "Thank you," he said back sincerely, knowing full well what it meant to have been there when Cythera needed him most, during those precarious days spent fighting for survival together side by side. Cythera pulled away slightly with a grin on her face now more mischievous than before as she looked up at Marcus. "Is this the extent of human romance?" she asked playfully, but he could sense genuine curiosity underlying that inquiry, too deeply rooted within those amber eyes gazing back into his own tired gray-green ones. He chuckled softly then, shaking his head in good-natured amusement, while still keeping a protective arm around her waist, pulling them both closer together under starlit night sky of unfamiliar homeland, now made familiar only through bond they had forged between each other. "You married a field doctor," Marcus said with affectionate fondness clear and tone carried over gentle breeze whispering past garden pathway behind them. Cythera